Part 1, Chapter 1, Betrothed. Peals of girlish laughter rang in the open air as Halima and her 7 handmaidens bathed in a shallow pool in the center of the palace garden. Amid floating lilies and dashing schools of minnows, they splashed and chased each other through the shimmering sunlit waves. Given license once a day to abuse their princess, the serving girls dunked Halima mercilessly, giving forth boisterous cries of victory every time she disappeared among rings of bright water. Spluttering, water gushing from her nose, Halima broke away for a moment's peace. Taking long, leisurely strokes, she swam to the far side of the pool. Like Venus, the princess rose dripping from the water, a sleek, graceful black swan. She dropped down on the sun-baked limestone, feeling a delicious sting as the stone scorched her flesh. Halima drank in the splendor, embracing the bathers. Scores of palm and mango trees and brightly colored flowers culled from the surrounding country, and she thought this was her favorite spot. If you could love a place the way you love a person, then that was how she felt about her father's garden. She shut her eyes and threw back her head, basking in the light-giving sun rays that flooded her lids with orange light. The sounds of laughter and splashing water faded away as Halima endeavored for the 3rd time that day to recall the previous night's strange dream. In her mind's eye, she fancied she saw emerge out of the cool, silvery mist a giant of a man who strode toward her with a lion's sure gait. His features were indistinct, but he wore a necklace of yellow, curving lion's teeth, and his body was broad and powerful, like the wrestlers who visited her father's court. She recalled his strong, large hands. Yes, if she tried, she could remember the touch of those hands. Halima felt a splash of water as someone approached, and like a child running out of a forbidden room, she quit her fantasy. Nima, her first handmaiden, splashed noisily over with her clumsy dog paddle. Halima groaned, but at heart she was pleased someone had missed her. Nima, whose name means born in prosperous times, was the closest thing she had to a real friend. "You've lived all your life by the sea," Halima called out. "Learn to swim properly." "I swim well enough," Nima insisted. Halima snorted, "Yes, for a hippo." Nima clambered out of the pool beside her. A fleshy girl of 14, proud of her full bosom and broad hips, she shook the water off her tail, jangling the mass of beads and copper bracelets that adorned her wrists and ankles. She squatted down at Halima's feet. "We're bored, Princess," Nima complained. "We want you to sing for us." Squinting against the sunlight, Halima protested. "All of you know the same old songs I do." "But none of us sing as well as you do, Princess." The other girls swam over and clustered eagerly around Halima, pleading for her to begin. Halima sighed, but was secretly glad for the attention. In her darker moments she felt it was only slavish flattery, but today she believed her handmaidens genuinely loved to hear her sing. "Well, I need accompaniment," she insisted. "Aisha, bring your muette." Aisha, her youngest handmaiden, ran off, arms fluttering like little wings, and then scurried back with a small stringed instrument that sang like a human voice. When the other girls had settled around her feet, Halima cleared her throat. Then in a voice as sweet and clear as any bird of the forest, she sang, "There is a land, a far-away place, I see only in my dreams. A mountain of silver, a ghost-white high mountain, I see only in my dreams, I see only in my dreams. And in this place is my lover, my dark, handsome lover. I go to him each night, but only in my dreams, only in my dreams." She drifted off, feeling blood rushing toward her cheeks, suddenly aware of the wide-eyed, innocent gaze of the young girls at her feet. Little Aisha paused from plucking the muette. Halima coughed and was gamely preparing to launch into the second verse when a rumble like far-off thunder distracted her. She shivered, suddenly aware of her nakedness. All at once she felt as helpless as a kitten. Halima bolted to her feet. Nima stood up beside her, and the other girls followed. "What, princess?" Nima demanded. "Hush!" Halima cried sharply. Obediently, the girls became silent, cocking their heads left and right, like curious cubs. Soon they could hear it too, the low, solemn beat of a drum. "The warriors are returning," said Aisha. "Hush!" said Nima, in precise imitation of the princess. Another girl, well versed in the language of the drum, struggled to interpret the faint sounds. "Many have died in battle. A royal person has fallen." Nima covered her gaping mouth. The other girls began to mumble prayers. Halima shut her eyes. "Damn," she thought. "Damn all those men and all their honor and all their wars." She felt herself beginning to cry. The interpreter bowed her head. "Forgive me, princess. It is your brother." Nima instantly burst into a loud, braying sob, and the other girls followed suit. They drew around Halima in a tight circle. She surrendered to their clammy embrace, although part of her wanted to wrench free and hide away alone. The funeral of Bakari, the brother of Halima, was full of honor, for he had distinguished himself in battle, slaying many of the enemy before a Zambian spear gored him. Women washed and wrapped his body in leopard skins. Then the men, their faces painted in white clay, the color of death, carried him aloft, leading a procession toward the burial field. The women marched behind, and Halima watched the long, winding line of women, led by the dead man's wives, preceding her. The widows made a solemn dance, a joyless, shuffling step, pitching to and fro as if they were on a rocking boat. They wailed their songs of mourning. "Our husband has left us. Now he fights alone, one spirit alone against the darkness. Our husband is gone. Now who will protect us?" Other songs praised her brother as a warrior and a hero, but Halima instead recalled a round-faced, bare-chested little boy running across the sand, shaking a sharpened stick, making believe it was a spear. Back then, she remembered, her elder brother had been her hero, leaping across ditches and stabbing at straw lions. Bakari, whose name meant noble promise, was Halima's special brother, for among her people siblings were paired and raised together, linked forever in a custom known as Garalanya, the first brother with the first sister, and so on. He was supposed to have been her lifelong friend and confidant. Instead, she was alone. Halima had lost 7 brothers to war. They had fallen in turn one after another. Silently, she again cursed men for having invented war, for having transformed boys' play into deadly art. She wished women ruled. Surely women would not allow such barbarity. Teeth clenched, Halima stubbornly refused to join in the dirge. Others may have noticed, but Halima was too angry to care. At the burial field, the body was laid east to west, in line with the setting sun. Bakari's favorite weapons were positioned nearby, along with blankets to keep him warm on his journey across the river of death, and their food to quiet his hunger. Anguished horns blared, and rattles as frightening as the death rattle itself shook fiercely, speeding him on his journey to join his ancestors. An awful bull roar, which made the roar of a jaguar, bellowed as if imitating the yawning, welcoming jaws of death. Halima and the other mourners returned to the palace, where the priests slaughtered a giant sea turtle, the symbol of their clan. Then the bones were burned and mixed with wine. They passed the cup, all members of the family drinking from it, saying prayers for the departed son. As the sun set, they went down to the blackening sea and cleansed themselves of the stench of death. Halima stood knee-deep in the ocean, looking out over the great stormy sea, imagining her brother wrestling with the tiny boat's sail, braving the perilous river of death. After the ceremony, a servant of her father, King Babatunde, summoned Halima to his chambers. The king's private chamber was a small but stately room, filled with rolls of papyrus, ceremonial spears and shields. Banners and masks decorated the walls, and finely crafted stone and wooden statues stood in each corner. Frankincense burned in a pot, lending the room a delicate fragrance. A single wick that floated flickering in a bowl of oil illuminated the chamber. In the center was an ivory stool into which was carved scenes from the long history of their family, from the founding father who first arrived in the land, to those who ruled in times of famine and flood and led the charge of warriors into battle. Babatunde sat on this throne, draped in a purple robe, fringed with the fur of a leopard. Halima ran and knelt at her father's feet, resting her cheek on his knee. She expected to be scolded for not having sung at the funeral, but she was not worried. She could always charm her way out of punishment. "Father, I learned a new song yesterday," she chirped. "May I sing it to you?" Babatunde shook his head. "Stand up, daughter," the king said gently. "You are too old to crouch at your father's feet." "There's no place where I'm more happy, father," Halima replied, smiling and hugging his knee more tightly. "Stand, I say," Babatunde insisted, firmly pushing her away. Halima stood up hurriedly. Her father was never cross with her, and so this new tongue stung. The king took her arm. "Daughter, you know that you're a jewel I prize above all else." Halima nodded. "Yes, father, you're always kind to me." The king took her small hand in his. "Halima, you are my only joy. To me you are like a new spring day. In the drought of my life, you were the gently falling rain." For the first time, the king looked truly old to Halima. He was bent and as wrinkled as a dry, withered fruit. Babatunde spoke slowly and chose his words carefully, as if he only had a few left. "Listen to me. One after another, each of your brothers has perished on the field of battle. One after another, we've watched each of our brave boys go down to the earth." Halima nodded solemnly. "I have no more sons of age to do battle. Our enemy, the warriors of the plain, the Zimbai, cannot be defeated. We are a trading people, craftsmen and merchants. They live to make war. The Zimbai are as pitiless as the beasts of the forest. If they overrun the city, they will destroy everything we love about our land, like fingers crushing the light from a candle." His hand hovered over the candle, throwing dark shadows across the room. Babatunde shook his head as if casting the image from his mind. Hoarsely, he continued, "I've sat with my counselors and my diviners. They say we must ally ourselves with the people of the West, the people of the snake. They are strong. They, too, are a warrior people. Only arm in arm can we keep the Zimbai at bay. If you wed King Aligbani, the ruler of the people of the snake, a bond of kinship will unite us for generations to come." Halima dropped his hand. She felt a rush of blood to her cheeks. She could almost pitch the old man over in his chair. How could he send me away? Bitterly she exclaimed, "You call me your precious jewel, but you would bargain me away like a plot of worthless land." Iron crept into the voice of Babatunde. "Every young woman must marry. Woman without man is like a field without seed. That is what the proverb says, Halima." She refused to look at him. "Father," she said softly, with her head hung low, "I am content here with you, and I've tried to make you content. Why must life change?" "Life is change," Babatunde replied firmly. Halima found herself breathing so fiercely her head swam. She envisioned the hills and valleys, the rivers and barren plains that lay between Kali and the kingdom of the people of the snake, and she knew she would not see her father again in life. "If you never want to see me again, surely you can send me farther away than that," she muttered. The king winced, as if a physical pain had lanced his heart. Halima's own bitter words echoed in her ears. She had never dared speak to her father before in such a tone of rebellion. With a gentle finger to her chin, Babatunde raised the girl's head so their eyes met. She stared at her father's sad yellow eyes. Over his shoulder, she could see death perched like a vulture. She remembered a proverb, "There is no medicine for old age." Babatunde looked at her helplessly, as if he wished to embrace her passionately but could not. Halima wished she could unsay her angry words. Of all the people in the world, he was the last she wished to hurt. The king whispered, "Daughter, we of royal blood belong to the people. In times of famine, we must spill our semen into the soil. In times of war, we must give up our best blood. We do what we must for the good of the many. We have no choice in the matter. A man is born, a man dies. The people must live on. There is no choice in these things, Halima." Halima saw he would not be swayed. Quietly she said, "Forgive me, father. You've told me my duty, and I will obey." The old king nodded. He drew his daughter's head into his lap and ran his withered hands through her long braids. Tears trickled down the old man's face, running through the crevices of his aged skin like an undammed river pouring through a ravine. Then they embraced as tightly as two lovers. It always seemed like a giant to her, but now his bones felt fragile and small. He whispered in her ear, "Brave, wise, obedient daughter, I will surely miss you." When Nima and the other handmaidens of Halima learned of the betrothal of their princess to King Alagbadi, they clapped their hands in joy. He was a wealthy and powerful king, and they all expected to find good husbands in his land. However, Halima did not feel such undiluted elation. She had never before left the serenity and comfort of her father's house. To what kind of place would this journey take her? What kind of man was her husband to be? What if he were cruel or ugly or simply dull, worst of all to a young mind? Each passing day, one of Halima's servants rushed home with a new rumor. One day he was tall and handsome, and the next day round and fat. One day he had a court of 50 wives and was a master of the art of lovemaking, the next a senile old man. Halima spent a grim afternoon walking the beach, wet sand squishing between her toes. She gazed out across the gray sky and the limitless sea. Imagine never seeing the ocean again, to never see dolphins leaping from the water, or hear the crash of waves against the rocks. She decided to pay a visit to her great-aunt Bimkubwa, her grandmother's sister, and thus one of the most honored of her clan. The venerable old woman had taken Halima under her wing when she was very small, after her mother had died. Over the years, she remained more of a mother to her than any of her father's wives. She was not an official diviner, but her parents had practiced magic arts in the land to the south, and Halima trusted her skills more than any of the court diviners. Bimkubwa lived in an uneven old house built of small clay bricks in the center of the city. The old woman greeted her in the doorway. "You haven't come to see your old Bimkubwa in a long time, child," the bent old woman scolded. "I, who suckled you with these very teats." She gestured at her bare, withered bosom. "Bah, the old are always forgotten." Then she laughed. Halima hugged the gray old woman, tears in her eyes. "Mother Bimkubwa, I am troubled, and I need your advice." Bimkubwa wiped away the young girl's tears with a crooked finger and led her in. The tiny round house was filled to the brim with shelves stuffed with jars of oils and weirdly twisted roots. A sweet smell, the intoxicating blend of unfamiliar herbs, filled the air. The atmosphere was so rich, with competing aromas, and so steaming hot that the young girl felt herself almost swooning. The old woman motioned for Halima to sit with her on a mat woven from palm leaves. She stared at her young kinswoman with eyes as black and sharp as a hawk's. Bim Kubwa told her, "You are about to take a long journey. You are to be married, but you don't know your husband." Halima's eyes widened. If anyone doubted that her great aunt had the vision of the third eye, here was the proof. The old woman cackled. "Old Bim Kubwa knows many things. That one? I heard at the marketplace." Halima put her fists at her hips in mock anger. Which of her handmaidens had been trading gossip, she wondered. "Let us see what the shells say, beautiful Halima." The old woman pulled from a nearby shelf a small goatskin bag and poured out a handful of cowrie shells. She begged Halima to arrange them. The young girl cautiously shuffled the shells about on the floor. Several times she changed the positions of each shell, mindful of the old woman's penetrating stare. Finally, satisfied, she stopped and leaned back. Bim Kubwa nodded and squinted as she studied the configuration of the shells. She blew out a mouthful of air, as if perplexed. She scratched her chin with two gnarled fingers. Then she shook her head, muttering. Halima felt a trickle of sweat run down her temple. "What do the shells say?" The old woman's eyes twinkled as she revealed the meaning of the shells. "The man you marry will have the heart of a lion. He will be strong, but to you he will surrender. He will be wise, but for you he will throw wisdom to the wind. He will be rich, but for your love he will lose everything."